Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome into the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you information on who to start, who to sit in the world of fantasy football. So, for right now, we're going to start off. We're going to go with the Thursday Night Football game. Now we're kind of getting into the sort of trash Thursday Night Football games, the San Diego Chargers, Denver Broncos. You know, we have something where the teams aren't what you would hope they would be. I mean, to be fair, we thought that the Denver Broncos would win. Thursday night game, they come out, they look a little bit flat. San Diego Chargers finally get that win that they kind of always were wanting. They got to win, but it was one of those things where they were never able to hold a lead. Henry Hunter is one of those
Henry Hunter, that's a real good name.
I mean, those are both names that he has. I just kind of did in reverse. Hunter Henry, he had 83 yards and a touchdown, and he's been somebody who has been productive as of late, kind of trying to be that stopgap between Antonio Gates in the past and maybe him in the future. Trevor Siemian, we saw him try to put a little bit too much on his plate. So what was your thoughts about this, Jeremiah? What did you think about Thursday night's game?
I saw a lot of good fantasy performances, and you forgot to introduce yourself to the good people.
I did forget to introduce. Okay, so my name is Anthony. Sorry.
And I'm Jeremiah.
Right, okay.
It's okay. And you're still learning the whole process of this. But, yeah, going back to this game here, you know, we did get a really good performance from Hunter Henry. He looks like he's involved a lot more despite Antonio Gates starting.
Sure.
Because, you know, he did play last night. And Melvin Gordon, he didn't have a touchdown, which was the big fantasy thing to, you know, that he was doing.
He also didn't have a fumble, though, so you get a little bit more confidence with that.
He didn't have a fumble. And he is the workhorse of this offense. So that is something to look forward to, and he did have 94 yards against the Denver Broncos. And Phil Rivers, it wasn't his best. It was probably his worst fantasy performance of the year. But, you know, he did play a pretty good passing defense, so you kind of have to expect that. And they got the running game involved more Melvin Gordon. But I did love what I saw from Hunter Henry here. He looks like he is someone that you need to own, especially with the tight end position being so kind of weak, so to speak. Yeah, I think he's someone that needs to be kind of in on your roster now. Yeah,
no, 100%. You talked about Phillip Rivers. He had a game where, you know, it wasn't really Phillip Rivers-esque. You know, he had under 200 yards passing for the first time since last year when they faced the Kansas City Chiefs, had 178 yards in that game. So Phillip Rivers, you know, it's one of those things where – it actually was the same thing this week. It's one of those things where, you know, Thursday night football, you never really want to start anybody on Thursday night just because it's one of those things where people are coming off a short week. You know, usually the home team will do better, which we saw this week in San Diego. It's just you can't ever trust that people, even Phillip Rivers, who before this had 3 straight games with 300 yards passing, you know, you feel like they're going to dip. Melvin Gordon had a good game, not in a touchdown, but it's one of those games where you talk about with Hunter Henry for the past 3 weeks, he's been slowly doing what you would hope a rookie tight end would want him to do. 83 yards, 74, 61, touchdown every week, getting a little bit better every week. So, you know, maybe look to him in the future with the Chargers because now that they're 2-4, you get a little bit of confidence. You're going into Atlanta with the Falcons. Atlanta's got a very bad defense, so you can hopefully expect him to do a little bit better next week.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the Denver Broncos on the other side here.
Okay.
Emmanuel Sanders, he's been pretty good so far this season. And Demaryius Thomas, he had 10 targets last night, and he looks like he is still the number one guy. But it seems like Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas are pretty much risky plays from here on out with Trevor Siemian. And Trevor Siemian threw for 50. He threw 50 times.
Yeah.
And he only got 230 yards out of that. So I think anyone on this Denver Broncos offense is a risky play right now because of the quarterback position. That's not a knock on Trevor Siemian. That's just, it's not really explosive as we thought. Not as we thought, but it's not as explosive as we've seen in the past. And as far as the running backs on the Denver Broncos, C.J. Anderson has kind of fallen off a little bit since his Week 1 performance. We all thought he was the leading dog there. He was a for sure top 5 fantasy running back. But Devontae Booker has kind of cut into his time there, and it looks like they're in a committee. Once again, the Denver Broncos have a running back by committee once again. It's something that you don't want to hear in fantasy at all. It's like the 4 baddest words you ever hear, running back by committee, or the 3 baddest words. And Devontae Booker looks like he's someone that needs to be on as well as probably like a stash because, he had 5 carries for 46 yards. That is really, really good. And on the receiving end, he only has 7, but he has 7 total touches. And he did a lot with those touches. And C.J. Anderson's total touches in this game was 14. So he out-touched him. He did out-snap him. But Devontae Booker kind of has to have you worry a little bit if you're a C.J. Anderson owner.
Yeah, C.J. Anderson's one of those guys who, even last year he was somebody who you never really had confidence in. He had 2 games or 3 games, you want to say 95 yards or more, 2 games with 100 or more rushing yards, but then you'd always mix in that 14, 42, 9, 34, 41, 22, 43. Like he would have bad, and then a great game, and you're like, oh, okay, great. 101 yards against the Packers, 34 the next week in Indianapolis, 9 yards, 59, 113 yards against the Patriots. Oh, great, 42, 14. Like it was one of those things where you could never be consistent with what he's doing, so it would be hard to start him. And then this week you're like, okay, maybe he's going to get it started, 92 yards in the game 1 against Carolina. Slowly has been going down ever since. 74 against Indianapolis, 37 against the Bengals, 49, 41, 37 in the last 3 weeks. So as good as he was to start off the year and as much confidence as you had in him, slowly he's been regressing back to a player who you probably shouldn't start. Like you look at Devontae Booker, yeah, he only had 5 rushes in this game, which isn't something that you would necessarily prefer. Like, if you're going to start someone, you want to get a little bit more than that. But it's still something to where he's doing about as productive things as Anderson is. The game against Indianapolis, like I said, where slowly C.J. Anderson was getting a little bit worse, he had 74 yards. Booker had 46 yards in that game as well. So it's one of those things where you don't really have confidence in either of the Denver running backs. It's something where if you have them, maybe you start Anderson just because you think maybe he's going to get the bulk of the carries, but then you saw yards per rush. Booker's doing better.
Yeah. You know who the best fantasy performer was last night? Josh Lambo, kicker for the San Diego Chargers, baby. Best fantasy performer from last night.
I mean, that's never good if your kicker's the best thing about it.
No.
But,
I just had to give some shine there.
That's fine.
I had to give some shine.
That's, I don't know. It's one of those things, 4 field goals, obviously that's going to help you out a lot. McManus had a couple. You had a safety in that game, which helps the cause, the defense. But I can't, for just any rational part of me, have any faith in the San Diego Chargers, anybody that they start. Even Melvin Gordon, because he'll get you those fumbles that'll kind of just kill. Just slowly little cuts will hurt your fantasy team. Hunter Henry is the only one that I would give a little bit of credit to because you thought before the game that Travis Benjamin would be somebody that you could maybe look forward to a little bit because he's slowly had a few games where he did well. He had 115 yards against the Jaguars and 117 against the Raiders. So you were thinking that maybe he could be a guy that stepped up, went down to 17 yards, but maybe that's just the Thursday Night Football thing kicking into effect.
Yeah, and it's tough to trust the San Diego Chargers receiving core. I think Hunter Henry is someone you kind of not have to start, but should consider starting because he is a tight end.
He's one of the better ones you have now, yeah.
Yeah, and this team doesn't have a number one receiver.
Right.
Travis Benjamin, he's had great numbers, but not every week.
Yeah.
Tyrell Williams, he is a risky play now. I was kind of high on him, but now it seems like he's regressing to someone that's kind of like somewhat borderline droppable at this point because, the San Diego Chargers don't have a really clear-cut number one receiver. Phillip Rivers is someone that kind of gets everyone involved in it, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I think Phil Rivers is someone that you could probably start as well. I think he's just one of those guys that's always going to get yards. Right. Remember, he's always going to be constantly down. His defense doesn't do anything. So I think he's someone that you should consider starting. But I do think Hunter Henry's probably the most trustworthy start on this team. As for the Broncos, I think there's a lot of risky players on this team, and but if you have to start him, you have to start him. That's the thing.
The only one that I would still probably just have a little bit of confidence would be Demaryius Thomas, just because we've seen Demaryius Thomas in the past and how good he can be. He's had 3 games this year where he's under 50 yards receiving, which doesn't exactly exude confidence for you. But at the same time, he's got 3 touchdowns receiving, and he's got 3 games where it's 90, 94, and 100. So, 3 games great, 3 games bad. In the games that he does well against, he did it against a good Cincinnati Bengals defense. So you can at least have a little bit of confidence that even if he does go against a good opponent, he can still, if it goes right, get you some yards.
Okay, well, we're going to take a first break here, Anthony, and we're going to get a new segment here. We're going to start a new segment. If you guys have listened to the fantasy football podcast that Alex, Anthony, and I do, we got a little special treat for you guys. We're going to put from one of our segments from that show, we're going to introduce it to this show, but fantasy style. Mm-hmm. So we'll tell you guys what this segment is, but we'll be right back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And the segment we're going to introduce here today is For Real? I'm sorry, I have to say it like that.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
But for some of you guys that listen, or girls, that listen to the fantasy, I'm not the fantasy.
Just a regular football podcast.
This is a fantasy podcast. Just a regular football podcast here at the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. We do a segment every Wednesday called For Real, and what it is we talk about players or teams that are having a hot streak, so to speak, and if they can possibly keep it up. Well, we're going to do that in a fantasy style because we always see studs weekly, and we always have to say, are they weekly wonders? So we're gonna do a fantasy style in this For Real segment. So first player we're gonna talk about was practically someone that caught everyone off guard, so to speak, and that's Sammie Coates,
right?
Receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he had a good game last week. 139 yards and 2 TDs, 11 targets. He did have 6 receptions, but he had 4 drops, so that has to be concerning. So my question is, Sammie Coates for real? And I still think it remains to be seen. I'm not completely sold on him yet, but he is someone that should be on rosters right now.
Right. So it's a thing with the Pittsburgh Steelers, kind of that like speed receiver who you're not exactly sure if they're good or not. Kind of the, thing they used to have before when they had I can't think of what his name is right now. The guy that left who went to Miami.
Mike Wallace.
Mike Wallace, who had a successful run there. Then he went to another team, didn't do the same thing. And now you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, like even last year when they had Martavis Bryant, had 765 yards, but averaged 15.3 yards per catch, had 6 touchdowns. Someone who we thought this year, that's going to be a struggle because they don't have him anymore. He's going to be that deep threat that they are lacking. Now all of a sudden it's not going to be the same thing. Well, you look at Coates, 139 yards last week, 97 against the Cincinnati Bengals. Like you said, he had some drops, which aren't the best thing in the world, but he's in his second year, basically a rookie because last year he barely played. Last year he only had 11 total yards. So it's one of those things where he's basically a rookie. He's getting accustomed to how to play in the NFL, and his thing is basically, run fast, run far. Ben Roethlisberger will get it to you. Antonio Brown's still the number one guy. That's always going to be his thing. The Steelers kind of have that thing. Hines Ward before was the number one guy. Everyone else kind of eats around that. Antonio Brown's number one guy, whether it's Wheaton, Coates, whoever else, Bryant, they all kind of eat around him. I think Sammie Coates is somebody who, if not relied on, like if he's your third or your flex, totally do that, 100%. But do I think he's for real as a sense of like he's going to average you like 100 yards every week? No, not even close. Especially when you look at it this week against Miami Dolphins, do I think he can get about 80, 90, 100 yards? Yeah. But do I think he can keep that up consistently throughout the year? No, I think he's going to have those like ups and downs because even if you look at how he's been doing this year, yeah, he had that 139-yard game against the Jets, but he only had 50 against the Eagles and only had 56 against the Washington Redskins. So he'll be hit or miss, but it'll be somebody who kind of like Bryant last year, probably have somewhere around 700-800 yards, and it'll be a solid flex player for you the whole year.
Yeah, he's more like a boomer bust player to me, but he has a great mouth-watering matchup against the Miami Dolphins defense, who are pretty bad.
You gonna rub that salt in the wound a little bit more?
I'm sorry.
You gonna do that to me?
Yes.
For those who don't know, I'm a Miami Dolphins fan and has not been
okay.
the best.
It's
best
okay.
season.
It's okay. My favorite team has a terrible defense.
Sure. Yeah, you got your Niners.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, so we have Sammie Coates, and we basically think he's going to be solid enough. Not great, not terrible, but someone you should probably start as your third or flex receiver. We're going to move to another player who struggled a little bit this year. We think he's a good running back. You got Todd Gurley over in now the LA Rams. Last year had 1,100 yards, somebody who it looked like it was promising for him, someone who's going to be a 1,000-yard rusher every single year. Kind of regressed a little bit this year. Someone who only has 288 yards throughout the whole season. His best game this year was an 85-yard game against Tampa Bay with 2 touchdowns. But after that, this last week against Buffalo, he had 72, but he had a 51, 47, 33. To be fair, he'll get you some receiving yards. Last 2 weeks he had at least 36 yards receiving. So you add him up, he's going to get you right around 80 to 100 yards in total offense, which is nice. Just not what we'd expect from him. It's kind of one of those things where they don't trust they don't trust the quarterback over in LA. Someone who, it's basically said, okay, we don't think you can be what you were last year. We're going to stack the box against you, and we dare Case Keenum to beat us. So, with Todd Gurley, do you think this is just like a rough patch? You think he can kind of get back to it? Because you look at the Rams, who they're facing the Lions, the Giants, teams that aren't exactly great as far as defense goes, as far as run. So what do you think about Todd Gurley?
It looks like he's heading to a little bit of a sophomore slump, and I thought he was going to be one of those players that was going to avoid it. But
Right.
To be realistic here, he is on the LA Rams, which have not been really successful in the past. And he does have a kind of mediocre quarterback, so to speak.
Right.
So defenses are going to stack the box against Todd Gurley, because how else are you going to win? And
Right.
that's what we saw actually in week 1 against the 49ers. And we all know how the 49ers defense is against running backs. He was the first one they faced, and they contained him the whole entire game. He only averaged 2.8 yards a carry in that game.
Right.
His total yards per carry for the season is 2.7. That is concerning, and his highest total It's 3.1.
Right.
Which was against Tampa Bay and Buffalo.
Right.
The two best games he's had all year. So there is some concern there. But to be fair, he does get involved in the passing game. So that's why I can't really say he's someone that you should sit because he's still highly involved in this offense. But he's not playing as the running back as some drafted him to be.
Right.
And he's not playing like a top 5 running back, but he is a top 10 running back in my eyes. And you talked about the matchups coming up. You know, you got Detroit and New York. I do think those are some pretty solid matchups.
Get him back on track kind of thing.
Get him back on track before the bye week.
Fair.
Because he does play Carolina week 9. So I do think he's someone you should still trust, and I don't think you have to worry about him right now. Remember, you saw what he did last year, and I know this is fantasy. We can't be going back to last year, but based on what he did last year, you still have to trust him. You know, this isn't Payne Hillis when he just completely fell off.
Right.
This isn't him. No, this is Todd Gurley. He's still someone you should trust. I'm not ready to completely write him off just yet.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like, I don't think, he's somebody who's going to fall off the face of the earth. It's probably just a rough patch because, like you said, if you have a quarterback who's not good, the defense is just like, okay, that's fine. We're going to stack the box, and I dare you to beat me. And so far, Case Keenum can't be that guy. So,
and you can't. But we're going to talk about a former quarterback,
right,
who has now made the transition to receiver, and that is Terrell Pryor, who had a good game 3 weeks ago against the Miami Dolphins.
Right.
Sorry about that.
It's fine.
He had 14 targets. That was actually Cody Kessler's first start, by the way. He had 14 targets, 144 yards, no touchdowns, but, man, he was highly involved in the game that day. Remember, he had 32 yards passing as well, 21 yards rushing, 144 yards in that game. That was the game that really got him on the fantasy map. And the week after that, he just hasn't been as involved. He still is getting at least 6 targets in the last 2 games. But I think this is someone that you probably have, I wouldn't say drop because he's highly involved in the offense, but he's probably someone you probably have to sit for a while because of, one, the team that he's on. He's just on an absolutely abysmal team in Cleveland. And people are going to defend him because he's the only weapon they have.
Right.
This team doesn't have what was the first receiver that they have? Corey Coleman. They don't have Corey Coleman for a while, and they don't have Josh Gordon probably not coming back to the team
he's
anymore.
Gone. He's not,
So Terrell Pryor is someone that I wouldn't drop him, so to speak, but I think if he has one more bad game, I think he's someone that's going to be dropped in a lot of leagues. And his matchup this week against Tennessee, it could be good, but it could also be really bad. Cincinnati, not really a good shot there. New York Jets, maybe. So, but do you really want to wait till October 30th to play him?
Right.
So he's someone that's real risky, and me personally, I wouldn't drop him unless there's someone really better on the waiver wire. But I don't know. I don't think Terrell Pryor is really for real like this year. But basically, he's gonna show some flashes. He's boomer bust, but Sammie Coates is a very better play than Terrell Pryor.
I would say yes. The one thing that I would say, though, with the Tennessee Titans, because as bad as the Tennessee Titans I guess say hit or miss, as they've been this year, you look at the teams that they've played so far. You look at the Texans, you look at the Raiders, you look at the Dolphins, everything else like that. The teams that the Tennessee Titans have played outside of the Dolphins last week where Parker had 70 yards. You look at the other teams that they played, Vikings, 100-yard receiver, Lions, 100-yard receiver, Raiders, 100-yard receiver, even Texans, so they didn't have a 100-yard receiver, and Will Fuller, 81 and a touchdown. So if you're the number one, you can get open a little bit with that team. Offensive line for the Titans is really good. Defensive secondary, not as good. So I would say you get one more week with Pryor, right? You have one more week, and if he struggles like this, then you cut loose. Then you cut bait, because after that, the Cleveland Browns, the schedule from here, it's not looking so pretty with them. After they play the Tennessee Titans, then they play the Bengals and the Jets, 2 teams that have a good defense, good secondary, and I wouldn't touch him after that. So I say you have 1 week just to see if he can do anything, and if not, then go away, run away.
Yeah, that's what I said. I won't drop him right now, but he does have a pretty okay matchup.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't perform well this week, and I do think he's going to be droppable, But we're going to take our second break, and we're going to be talking about some players who you should start or who you should sit.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be right back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. So we're going to delve into a little start or sit for this week. So we're going to start off with starters. It's people we think you should start. Number one, Shady McCoy.
Oh, yeah. Top 3, top 2 play this week.
100%.
Going against the San Francisco 49ers. And
if you look at the last 4 weeks with the San Francisco 49ers, because take out that LA Rams game in week 1 where they played on Monday night, the second Monday night game, which was at like midnight for people on the East Coast. Forget about that game. Throw that away. The last 4 weeks, be it Fozzie Whitaker, be it Christy Michael, be it Ezekiel Elliott, be it David Johnson, everyone gets 100 yards. Everybody eats. Everybody does well against the San Francisco 49ers. And it's not like you're giving somebody in Shady McCoy who's not good. We've seen Shady McCoy being a fantastic running back in the past. And now you're basically having a team with confidence. Also, don't forget about Tyrod Taylor. He could be running around too. Shady McCoy, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, been fantastic, been somebody who you like to start anyways. And now you're doing it where you get against a bad San Francisco 49ers defense. Start him. 100% start him. You won't be sorry.
If you do sit him, my gosh, you need to stop playing fantasy football. I'm just being for real
unless
here.
you have like Le'Veon Bell and, people who use Ezekiel Elliott.
Then trade him. Trade LaShawn McCoy. What do you have on your team if you don't need him?
Maybe that's why they don't start him. But yes, if you do not have either of those guys, he needs to be your at least number 2.
Okay. And we saw what Shady McCoy did against the Arizona Cardinals, 110 yards.
Right.
In that game. Mm-hmm. And last week against the Los Angeles Rams, a better defense by far as the 49ers is. 150.
Mm-hmm.
A total of 158, I might add.
Right.
So imagine what he's going to do to the San Francisco 49ers defense. He might go for 200 yards.
No Bowman.
I wouldn't be surprised.
No Bowman. Navarro Bowman's gone.
No, exactly.
Just that whole defense, the whole team for the 49ers has been ravaged with either injuries or retirements, and now you're going to throw a legit running back into there. Yeah, with the Bills, who are on a little bit of a hot streak right now, 100% start him, have fun, thank me later. Now.
You can thank me now. Kidding.
So he's one of your starters. We're going to go to another starter, people who you believe you should start, and we're going to go to someone it's not been as easy to start him recently, and that's Kelvin Benjamin of the Carolina Panthers. Looks like Cam Newton will be fine. Looks like he's out of the concussion protocol and everything that happens with that. It looks like he'll be playing. So you look at Kelvin Benjamin. Last week he struggled with Tampa Bay. Quarterback situation not as great. He had 70 yards, which isn't terrible. Week before that, 39. Week before that, 0. But the one reason why I think above all you start Kelvin Benjamin, like I said, Cam Newton's back, but also the Saints. They're facing the Saints. If you're facing the Saints and you're a wide receiver or you're a quarterback, you play them. This is how this goes. I don't care who it is. You can look at, someone, call it last week with the Carolina Panthers, or 2 weeks ago, when they played the Atlanta Falcons. How'd that work out? How'd that work out for Matt Ryan? How'd that work out for Julio Jones? Worked out pretty well. And I understand that Julio Jones is one of the top 3 or 4 receivers in the NFL, along with Odell and everybody. But it's something to where even something with with Rudolph. Rudolph got 70 yards as a tight end. He hasn't been doing as well. He's did well against that team. Going against the Saints, you got to start Kelvin Benjamin.
Yeah, and I like Kelvin Benjamin this week. He did kind of have like a little bit of an off game the past couple of weeks, against Atlanta, 39 yards and 70 yards in the Monday night game. And I kind of touched on it a little bit. And he hasn't had 100 yards since that San Francisco 49ers game,
Right.
but that was against the San Francisco 49ers.
Again, bad defense, right.
So he's going to have a really big game this week against the Saints, in my opinion. And plus, Cam Newton's probably going to come back. He's been at practice this whole entire week.
Yep.
So I do expect Cam Newton to put up good numbers. I do expect Jonathan Stewart to put up numbers, who's also coming back in this game. Calvin Benjamin to put up numbers. Greg Olsen to put up numbers. Just start your top guys from the Carolina Panthers against the Saints in this game, and I do expect Calvin Benjamin to be probably the top fantasy performer of this week. He could be that way. So he's a for sure starter. Go ahead and start him. He is probably the start of the week in the wide receiver position. But as for guys that we're not really want to start on our teams, but I think two of these guys are very valuable. One of them is Jamal Charles. He's probably going to make his first starts in over a year since coming off the ACL injury. And he's probably going to be in a timeshare, I think, because I think Spencer Ware has earned a role on this team.
Right.
He is going against the Oakland Raiders, but I don't know. I don't know if I would trust him this week. He said he's 110%, but I don't know.
That's fantastic. That's the same as when like a quarterback who's like 40 years old says, I've felt the best I've felt in 10 years. Okay, that means you basically don't want us to know that you're not as good as you were. So with Jamal Charles, basically – the last time he had 100 yards rushing was against the Denver Broncos on September 17th, over a year ago. It's been a little bit of time for Jamal Charles. We all remember what Jamal Charles was, but the time we remember what Jamal Charles actually was 2013, right? 2014 he had 1,000 yards, but barely over 1,000 yards. The time when he was actually Jamal Charles, like remember that game against Oakland 2013, where he had 195 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns, just ran all over the Oakland defense. Since then, he's been a good player and absolutely somebody that can get you both receiving and rushing, but he hasn't been the same guy. And now you're going to kind of throw him, by the way, also 29 years old. You're going to throw him, in December, he'll be 30 years old. All of a sudden, he hits that 30 mark where all of a sudden he's not the same guy. And now he's had the injuries, which kind of been testing him over the last couple of years. And like you also said, Spencer Ware has been somebody that you would bench by any stretch. He had 70, 57, 75, and 82. Also can get you 200 total yards in receiving, 199 in receiving all year. So he's dual threat like that, like the way Jamal Charles used to be. I would be very hesitant. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm just saying coming basically parachuting into the league, I wouldn't start Charles if I were you.
Yeah, I think this is a risky play this week for Jamal Charles owners. I think he's someone you have to take the wait-and-see approach, and he does have really good upside. I still think the upside is there, but he's not going to get like 30 or 40 touches like he used to when he was the workhorse of the Chiefs back in the day,
right?
So to speak. It makes it seem so long ago that he was just a workhorse of this team.
Right.
But the Chiefs do have a couple of favorable matchups after this Oakland game. They have the Saints, the Colts, and the Jaguars. So these are really 3 games that you can possibly play Jamal Charles in. I think he's more of the 50-50 if you don't have anyone else this week. If you have someone on the bye week, then maybe you should start Charles. But if you have someone better, I would start Devontae Freeman over Charles this week, and Freeman has a matchup against Seattle. So he's that risky to me this week. So I would take the wait-and-see approach, like I said in the 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's what we're saying. We're not saying we're not saying drop him. We're just saying that, he had 7 yards last week, and you're hoping that he can just all of a sudden come in, more or less out of the blue and be what he was before. Maybe he needs a couple of games to get in there, and like you said, the teams that he's going to be facing after that, that's a good way to kind of get your groove back.
Yeah, so I think you should probably consider starting him in Week 7 against the Saints. If he has a really great game against the Raiders, and it could happen, the Raiders' defense,
right?
They have had their struggles this season. But we do have one more player we're going to talk about before we get out of here on this lovely Friday morning where it's raining here in Northern California. LeGarrette Blount, he is going against the Cincinnati Bengals, and Tom Brady is back. They look like they're about to be going to the passing game. And does that make LeGarrette Blount a risky play? Yes, it does, because, you have probably the best quarterbacks right now in the league. Yeah, I would probably won't take the chance and start LeGarrette Blount because Tom Brady is back. And, a lot of the game plans are not really consistent for the Patriots. So I would I would sit LeGarrette Blount against this week, and especially against a very soft defense in Cincinnati. I think they're going to try to get the passing game. I think they're going to get James White involved more in this game. So, yeah, I would sit him this week. But he is still a valuable player to have on your roster. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it's not a good start this week.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where, with Tom Brady back, with that double tight end system that we're seeing with Gronk and Bennett, it's one of those things where you also have Edelman, you also have Hogan, people doing that. He's going to spread the ball around there. We just don't think LeGarrette Blount will be the same guy, right? Because basically before when they had Brissett or they had Garoppolo, it was one of those things of we don't want to have the quarterback do too much. Kind of the whole thing we're seeing with either Dak Prescott, Carson Wentz, even Trevor Siemian. One of those things where it's just like, okay, we don't trust the quarterback that much, so we're going to let the running game and other things kind of set everything else up, so that way we're fine. Now you got Tom Brady back. Now you're basically bringing back the offense that you wanted, the double tight end offense, and also you even have the thing where potentially you could have Julian Edelman, be like one of those kind of rushing wide receiver kind of things. He's got 7 rushes this year, so maybe they throw him a bone or two, get him a couple of things. I'm not saying LeGarrette Blount will have like 7 yards. I'm saying that he won't be what he was in the past just because now the offensive mentality is different. Yeah.
Something else I want to point out, too. LeGarrette Blount did get 18 attempts to rush. This is in Tom Brady's return. Only had 37 total yards against the Cleveland Browns.
Right.
So he did have a touchdown, but still, if he didn't have that touchdown, he would have only had like 3 points.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's why I think he's a little risky right now since Brady is back, but I do see him having a couple of really good games. He's going to be up and down, just how he was in the past. But, yeah. But that's going to end our show, Anthony.
All right. We had a good show. I feel like we had some solid advice. Hopefully we were right about how all of this broke down. Maybe LeGarrette Blount blows it for us. But
and something we also want to point out is that you can pretty much start anyone on the Pittsburgh Steelers this week.
Oh, you're going to do that? You're going to do a little more salt in the wound thing? You can talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, how they're playing the Miami Dolphins. That's what you're going to do to me right now. That's fine. That's fine. It's not a big deal.
Hey, we talked about LaShawn McCoy going against the Niners.
That's true. We did do a whole second, not just LaShawn McCoy against your team. Yeah, it's not. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
I'm sorry, man. I got to do too.
No, that's totally fine.
But anyways, yeah, we hopefully we were all right. And we'd like to thank you guys for tuning into the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. You can catch the show on a variety of platforms on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, and SoundCloud. And you can also go to the website at gsmcpodcast.com. You can also follow the show on Twitter. I don't know, I guess you can try to ask us some advice there on the Twitter page.
Yeah.
That is at GSMC_F football. And you can also go on the Instagram account at GSMC_F football. And you can also like us on Facebook at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And good luck on your fantasy teams this weekend, guys. And I'll be back by myself on Tuesday.
I will be back on Friday.
And thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.